So now we've convinced an athlete maybe, okay, lifting might be something, but do I only do it in the winter? Do I do it all year round? How do I manage that?
Right. Good. Yeah, that's a great question. I get that one a lot. And sometimes resistance to lifting comes from people who have tried lifting during the season and then they're just always wrecked. And the answer or the response I would have to that is, well, you're probably not quite doing it in an optimal fashion. So definitely lifting in the winter is good. Primary reasons are cycling has lots of negative implications for our physiology and our long-term physical development and health. Cycling. So in the gym, when you lift weights, you have concentric and eccentric movement, right? Concentric is when you're moving with the fibers, meaning the fibers are getting shorter under load. Eccentric means the muscle fibers are getting longer under load. So an example of that would be if you're doing a back squat, so you have the bar on your back and you descend down into the squat, your quadriceps are preventing your knees from exploding. Their fibers are contracting, but they're being pulled apart. So during that eccentric load, that's when you actually do the muscle damage because it literally rips the fibers apart. You can see it in a microscope if you take some muscle tissue after a hard lifting session or after a CrossFit session, and you look, the fibers are like shredded. They're all destroyed. And that's how you get stronger is they glue back together and then the fibers become resistant to that load. If you CrossFit yourself to death and you give yourself rhabdo, that's when you've got so many exploded muscle cells that there's a bunch of basically chunks of muscle in your bloodstream. And then you have real serious health problems. So don't lift that much. But
Can't that also happen from like a 300-mile gravel ride?
Sure. Rhabdo is just a function of too much load relative to what the system is capable of handling. So yeah, if you're training 4 hours a week and then you go do the Unbound XL and you go like you shoot out like you're in a cannon, you could give yourself rhabdo for sure.
Yeah.
No question. Yeah. So it's just a function of the demands of the event being way too much for how trained the athlete is. Which usually comes down to ego or ignorance or both. So in cycling, there is no eccentric load. There's only concentric load. The muscle fibers only are shortening as they produce load. The exception to that would be if you were riding a fixed gear in San Francisco with no brakes, right? Because then you'd have to backpedal down all the steep climbs. So we don't have eccentric load. So when we go into the gym in the winter, we give ourselves eccentric load. That's why we can make ourselves dreadfully, fantastically sore in the first 2 weeks of lifting if you haven't been lifting for a while. So you want to really proceed with caution for the reasons we just talked about. You don't need to make yourself excessively sore. If you're having trouble walking up and down the stairs, you overdid it a bit. So we have no eccentric load. We also have limited ranges of movement on the bike, right? When you extend your knee at the bottom of the stroke, it doesn't extend all the way to full extension or neutral, right? It goes part way. And so you get adaptive muscle shortening. So your hamstrings start to become a little bit shorter. Your calves become a little bit shorter because you're doing thousands and thousands of reps without full ROM, right? And then we're only moving in the sagittal plane, which is the plane in which you run and walk.
So then let me ask you this. Do you have people lift cycling specific or whole human specific?
Great question. That's exactly what I'm outlining.
Okay.
In the winter, I would have people choose a strength training program that offsets the shortcomings of cycling to help balance them out as an athlete. Because in order for us to keep riding our bikes for many years, we have to counterbalance, swing the pendulum the other way during the off season to make ourselves more bulletproof and give ourselves a better systemic ability to execute on life and strength. And then during the season, especially when we're approaching our peak event, I might have someone do a more cycling specific program, which would entail specific movement patterns that replicate the archetypes of movement we find on the bike, which fundamentally are a hip hinge, which is equivalent to a deadlift, and lunges, which is simply pushing down with one leg and then the other, and then the one and the other, right? So I like a lot of bent over rows, split stance deadlifts, Romanian or Bulgarian split squats. Apparently in strength and conditioning, Romania and Bulgaria are the same country because those two terms are used interchangeably all the time. But the idea is it's a lunge with your rear foot elevated.
So I was gonna say that's what when I looked up what I had to do PT, and it was RFE split squat. I'm like, oh, is this Bulgarian, Romanian? Wait, which is this? What's the
Yeah.
difference? So I did so much Googling. Those, I will say to anybody else, they were extremely difficult when I first started doing them, and I'm a huge fan of the split squat. So yeah, I've
Yep.
this was probably the first year that I could probably say I've been seriously cycling lifting for maybe 5 years now. And this is really one of the first times that I got more into unilateral, or, one leg at a time.
Yep.
And I've definitely found some interesting benefits from that. So I'm happy to hear that seconded from you.
So that's a great subtle point. Unilateral exercises versus bilateral exercises, right? So how much cycling is bilateral?
None.
What do you think? None. Exactly. 0. So okay, is a squat a bilateral exercise? Yes. Is a deadlift a bilateral exercise? Yes. So how much bilateral movement in the gym should we do in season versus out of season? Well, if you're me, you would put more of that in the off season for most athletes. Not always, but for most athletes. And then I would put more unilateral stuff in season, right? Going with that philosophy of we're balancing the athlete more in the winter, and then in season we're bringing them more towards their sport specific honing, sharpening of the blade.